I have been playing a game that I was really looking forward to for quite a while. And actually, I think that a history lesson is required in some ways. Biomutant is first of all, it's a third-person open-world action game with RPG elements sprinkled in. There's a morality system, skill points, so on. I'll touch on all of them as we go. But if you're not aware of the game, then you definitely won't be aware of its development history. And that is important for what I'm going to say in a second, right? So, announced in 2017, originally meant to be out in 2018, I think it was. And then it had its release date pushed loads throughout the years. All of that is important to just have in your head when I say this next bit. Because, Matthew, Biomutant feels like an old game.
Right.
When I say an old game, I don't mean one from 20 years ago, alright? I mean one from the early to mid 2010s. And that does feel like a different time in open world games. Let's call it pre-Breath of the Wild.
Right.
Those heady days when Ubisoft were just flooding their map with needless, samey, throwaway activities. If you love that busy work, then you will quite enjoy what Biomutant has to offer, because it is full of fetch quests and full of these little diversions that revolve around the same type of puzzle.
Right.
These diversions, these little puzzles, basically, our world, the human world, is referred to as the old world because we destroyed the world, right?
Oh God, that's so us, isn't it?
Oh, totally. We destroyed the world, and a lot of our old technology is scattered around Biomutant. So that'll be like telephones, toilets, washing machines, whatever else. And when you come across these, you get these little rotation puzzles where you must match up the colours using little twisty knobs, and then you get XP when you complete it. And there's typically about 5 of these. So there'll be 5 microwaves, 5 washing machines, 5 whatever else it is, right? And when you've done, I don't know, 1 or 2, you go, oh, it's the same trick over and over and over again. And it becomes incredibly tired very, very fast. There are other little diversions, I suppose, that don't necessarily involve these old world technologies, and they are just as frequent. You know, save the captives from the bandits. There's about 20 odd of them or so. Interact with notice boards. Again, I think there's about 15 or so of them. That just means walk up to a notice board and press a button. Yeah, it just gets tired very quickly because they're all pretty much the same. But the fetch quests I mentioned, they're a little more involved. Like, they require you going up to an NPC, having a bit of a back and forth, but they're still fetch quests. You might get a bit of gear at the end, but after doing a handful of those, it's very difficult to G yourself up to talk to another talking animal. As uninspiring as this optional content is, one of my big issues with these side quests, these little diversions, the saving the captives, the going up to the NPCs, whatever else, all these side quests, they're all under the one banner and one icon on the map. And that is sort of reflective of a wider issue I have with Biomutant. It's just, on the map, it becomes totally overwhelming, because in an open world game, if I know I'm going from A to B, I like to plot my route and say, I could do these side quests along the way. And, you know, I could focus on the more rewarding ones. But here, it's just, there's like a yellow circle for the main quest and blue circles for, or hexagons, whatever they are, for all of the other side quests and activities. The difficulties within the UI is spread across the entirety of the game, basically. Like, that awkwardness translates to the crafting, the equipping of gear, the fact that there are 3 lots of skill points. Everything outside of the combat is overcomplicated. The crafting, right? You would imagine in this RPG, quite important. It's mostly fairly pointless. I really wanted to engage in this system, and I wanted to make my little cat man the most vicious cat man in all the land. I was going to make him just, you know, a little powerhouse. I think I crafted maybe about 5 or 6 weapons over the course of 22 hours, I think it was.
Right.
Now,
is it crafting new things rather than upgrading things you already have?
So you can do both. You get loot, like, you know, you scavenge buildings and you pick up loot, and you can use that loot to create new guns, new melee weapons, or you can upgrade guns and melee weapons that you have. But maybe, I don't know, maybe I was just lucky very early on and I got strong loot, but I just never found myself in a position where I needed new weapons all that often, or that I needed to upgrade my weapons all that often.
Right.
Because, that's what it ultimately comes down to. Like when crafting a weapon, will I get a higher number than the previous number? And if I don't, well, what's the point in engaging in the system? So these buildings that you loot as well, loads of them, and my God, loads of loot. Now, this is a minor thing, but it's just, it's a game that is full of these little minor things. When you collect loot, and I'm not talking Arthur Morgan and Red Dead 2 slow here, but whenever you pick up an item, a little screen pops up telling you what you picked up, the benefits of each item, etc., etc. Now, you can skip past it relatively quickly, and if you take one isolated instance of this, you go, what's the problem here? Calm down, Colin. You're kicking off now over something that isn't that big. But it's just the sheer volume of loot, the amount of stuff you are collecting means that you come across this a lot of the time, and it grates more than it should, because it just takes you out of the world.
Right.
A world that is lovely and a world I want to be in. It's that abundance of loot that, you're constantly getting wrestling with the UI, I suppose, and the loot never really feels special because of the amount that's in it.
So that sounds to me a little bit like, this, I know this is a new studio, it's not a new team, they've got some like experienced people on there. They come from like, I want to say Avalanche.
Just Cause, yeah.
They got like Just Cause in their blood, which was another game which had like a huge open world and sort of had to resort to quite a lot of like repetition and padding to actually fill it. Do you think it's that? Do you think it's just that they've built a big open world and like, being a relatively small team, they've had to sort of not fill it in an easy way, but fill it in a way which kind of like you can see through a bit too easily? Perhaps.
That would explain the repetition in the activities that you do in the side quests and the main quests as well. But that doesn't really explain the issues with the UI. It's incredibly fiddly. Like, there's a separate menu for every little thing. Like, there's the separate menu for crafting, there's a separate menu for equipping gear, there's a separate menu for telling you the points that your character has, there's a separate menu for spending each individual point. It's needlessly convoluted in that way. So like, I take your point. Yeah, totally new studio. I was really pulling for him, and maybe they've had to pad out other aspects of the game, but I don't know how to justify the other issues.
Yeah.
It gets in the way of what is, occasionally, a quite enjoyable combat system.
Can you tell me about the combat? Because I remember seeing this early on, and it had this like massive scale to it, this big open world. They were clearly pushing that, but at the same time, the individual encounters seemed to have a bit more like character and style to them than you might expect from an open world game. Like, it almost seemed like they were talking a kind of Devil May Cry-ish action system embedded in an open world, which I thought sounded quite tantalizing when I first saw this in 2017, I think.
Devil May Cry is probably the best comparison point, really, because there are complexities to the combat. Well, I suppose first of all, you have swords and guns. I will say, like, don't expect combat on the level of your favorite action games, or just again to use a Devil May Cry. But there is openness in how you play. So, like, you can dual wield guns, you can focus on melee attacks, you can carry a sword and a heavy shotgun, and you can, dip between the two, mixing your weapons and your abilities as well that you acquire through those 3 different skill points. And all that can result in some good fun, because, like, the abilities you acquire are relatively different. To give you a taste, by the end of the game, I had a dash that I could use that would just fire me into the faces of enemies and do damage. I could shoot ice up from the ground, which would cause damage, and whenever enemies would walk across it, they'd be slipping and sliding, they'd lose their footing. And I could also shoot electricity from my little paws. And that's just a few. So, like, there's depth there. Like, I haven't even mentioned the Super Wung Fu yet.
No, you haven't. Please do.
There are a lot of wrinkles to this game in every aspect of it. But, like, the Super Wung Fu turns you into a time-limited thunder bastard, I suppose.
Right.
And you trigger that by performing 3 successful combo attacks. So yeah, you do your 3 combos, and then for however many seconds, you have 4 available actions to you that will just do serious damage. Juggling all this, juggling the basic attacks, juggling the Super Wung Fu, juggling your abilities, juggling just your weapons. Once you get the hang of it, that aspect is pretty intuitive, and it plays relatively well. Some of the weapons do feel a bit weightless, but I mean, I'll take a positive, and this is good.
It looks quite spectacular in full float. Like, you know, there's lots of whiz bang particle effects, the sound effects, the being sort of written, what's that called, onomatopoeia and all that kind of stuff. That looks fun.
It does work well. Like, you know, you see the moves of the combos popping up when you perform them successfully. As you say, there is a bit of that Adam West Batman kablamo pow whatever else, that kind of comic book style, which gives it life. And there is a parry system as well, I should mention. Talking about Batman, there's a little white flash that appears above enemies that you can parry them and inflict damage. Like, all of it works relatively alright once you get in a groove. It's I mean, I can't compare it to a Devil May Cry, to a Bayonetta, to whatever your favourite action game is, whatever, something from Platinum. That would be a step too far, really. But still, yeah, once you get in the groove, pretty alright. Now, I suppose that's as good a time as any to talk about something that isn't alright, which is the reason you're here, the execution of the stories, the characters you come across. I mean, yeah, I already mentioned it, but yes, humans, us, we've made shit of the place. And animals are living in it now, and they're trying to fix it, basically. You specifically are looking to sort out this war that's broken out amongst a few tribes, and you have to defeat these 4 monsters called World Eaters. They're devouring something called the Tree of Life, as you'd imagine, a pretty important tree. The dialogue in this, right, the only way I can describe it is incredibly odd. This isn't why it's odd. I'll tell you why it's odd in a second. But it's all delivered through a narrator. The characters make these gibberish noises that aren't as annoying as Banjo-Kazooie. Nowhere near. So I'll say that. That's something. But what these characters say is a mixture of... It's a mixture of something a Cambridge philosophy student would stick in their dissertation and words you'd hear on an episode of In the Night Garden. It is such a contrast, and it is so jarring. Every character will ultimately, I've made reference to it, the fetch quest, they'll ultimately ask you to go somewhere and get something for them. But before you leave, they'll deliver these wordy soliloquies that don't do much to push the story forward and feel just needless, really. But they'll also call guitars things like twing twangs or an arcade cabinet a bleep bloop cupboard.
I mean, that is what I call them, so...
I think microwaves are fry sparkers and mechanics are tinker tonkerers. And, you know, it is a choice that they fully commit to, so fair play. They really go for it. It just didn't gel with me. I found it, too much of a jarring contrast. It just doesn't land. I know the premise isn't breaking new ground about humans being bastards and making shit of the world, but I was alright with it, and I was ready to tell me your story. But it's just, the characters say a lot without saying much. So do you, actually, not you personally, Matthew, but in the game, because there is, I think I mentioned this, there is a morality system. So when you're talking to NPCs, you'll have dialogue options, and you'll be given certain opportunities in the game as well to perform either light or dark actions. Paragon and Renegade, basically. I can't really... I was mostly going for the nicey-nicey approach, so I can't say if you were playing as a bastard, if you would get a wildly different experience, but it didn't seem like there were these massively contrasting branching paths. To me, but I can't say that for definite. But yeah, the morality system seems just a bit... I don't think it's necessary in the game. I would have nearly whipped it out and focused on your looting and your crafting a little bit more or something like that.
It sounds like it's just kind of a small, I think 18 people and very ambitious team has maybe bitten off more than they can chew, or like spread themselves a little thin, perhaps.
Perhaps. Like, to be fair, to give them their due in something that I haven't really spoken about much, the world is genuinely gorgeous. Like, and this kind of goes back, I suppose, to the combat and like the things popping up. But yeah, like the world is
This
great.
always demoed really well because of that. You were like, when they said we're this small team, you look at it and think, I mean, this looks like substantial and kind of like beautiful. You know, I don't know if that's because it's got colour. Another game's tone.
It does show well against just regular brown action games, but like it is like it's gorgeous. Like, you know, they're like lovely dusty deserts and like real green forests and kind of these alien flora and fauna about the place. It's really nice. Like, it looks nice in either like there's a day or night cycle, and but there's just little issues here as well. So there are inhospitable parts of the game, right, where it will be, like, you know, beautiful areas, but some areas will be radioactive, or they'll be too hot or too cold or too whatever it is. And you'll see a little percentage thing count up in the top corner, and when that reaches 100%, you'll die quite quickly. And these just don't come into play nearly enough for me. They're sort of off the beaten path. Now, maybe that rewards people for going hunting for loot or whatever, but I don't know who needs more loot in this game. But it's just something that, like, actually I thought that's something that they could have used more of, funnily enough. I was really looking forward to this. It was one of my most anticipated games of the year, actually, and I don't know, it just hasn't lived up to the game that I thought I would be playing. It has some good parts. The combat is pretty good when you get into a flow. As I said, it looks gorgeous. But what Biomutant does is it gets in the way of itself far too often. Because you will be enjoying the combat and kind of flitting between all the different systems, but then, I don't know, you'll have to talk to a character and he'll just spout absolute wallop at you. You'll be like, oh, all right, okay. Or you'll go over here and you'll solve these rotation puzzles. But yeah, shame. Good proof of concept for Biomutant 2, maybe. But ultimately, just a bit of a shame.